In this three-part series, we listen to Saint Faustina describing her dark night of the soul, when she experienced a spiritual trial of trials, where she journeyed from faith and consolation into doubt and despair, with various temptations from Satan, then to feeling completely abandoned by Jesus, and finally attaining a higher level of spiritual closeness to God. In this second episode, we listen to the abandonment and worsening trials that Saint Faustina underwent after gaining a deeper knowledge of God and experiencing her initial trials. We read in paragraph 98. When the soul comes out victorious from the preceding trials, even though it may stumble here and there, it fights on valiantly, humbly calling upon God, "Save me, I am perishing," and it is still able to fight on. At this point, however, the soul is engulfed in a horrible night. It sees within itself only sin. It feels terrible. It sees itself completely abandoned by God. It feels itself to be the object of His hatred. It is but one step away from despair. The soul does its best to defend itself. It tries to stir up its confidence, but prayer is an even greater torment for it, as this prayer seems to arouse God to an even greater anger. The soul finds itself poised on the summit of a lofty mountain, on the very brink of a precipice. The soul is drawn to God, but feels repulsed. All other sufferings and tortures in the world are as nothing compared with this sensation into which it has been plunged, namely, that of being rejected by God. No one can bring it any relief. It finds itself completely alone. There is no one to defend it. It raises its eyes to heaven, but is convinced that this is not for her. For her all is lost. It falls deeper and deeper from darkness to darkness, and it seems to it that it has lost forever the God it used to love so dearly. This thought is torture beyond all description. But the soul does not agree to it, and it tries to lift its gaze toward heaven, but in vain. And this makes the torture even more intense. If God wishes to keep the soul in such darkness, no one will be able to give it light. It experiences rejection by God in a vivid and terrifying manner. From its heart bursts forth painful moans, so painful that no priest will comprehend it unless he himself has been through these trials. In the midst of this, the evil spirit adds to the soul's suffering, mocking it. "Will you persist in your faithfulness? This is your reward. You are in our power." But Satan has only as much influence over the soul as God allows him, and God knows how much we can bear. "What have you gotten out of your mortifications," says Satan, "and out of your fidelity to the rule? What use are all these efforts? You have been rejected by God." This word "rejected" becomes a fire which penetrates every nerve to the marrow of the bone. It pierces right through her entire being. The ordeal reaches its climax. The soul no longer looks for help anywhere. it shrinks into itself and loses sight of everything. It is as though it has accepted the torture of being abandoned. This is a moment for which I have no words. This is the agony of the soul. Then my physical strength began to fail me, and I could no longer carry out my duties, nor could I any longer hide my sufferings. Although I did not say a word about them, the look of pain on my face betrayed me. The superior told me that the sisters had come to her saying that when they look at me in the chapel, they are moved to pity because I look so terrible. Yet, despite all efforts, the soul is unable to conceal such sufferings. Jesus, you alone know how the soul, engulfed in darkness, moans in the midst of these torments, and despite all of this, thirsts for God as burning lips thirst for water. It dies and withers. It dies a death without death. That is to say, it cannot die. All its efforts come to nothing. It is under a powerful hand. Now the soul comes under the power of just one. All exterior temptations cease. All that surround it becomes silent, like a dying person who loses contact with everything around it. The person's entire soul is in the hand of the just God, the thrice holy God, rejected for all eternity. This is the culminating moment, and God alone can test a soul in this way, because He alone knows what the soul can endure. When the soul has been saturated through and through by this infernal fire, it is, as it were, cast headlong into great despair. My soul experienced this moment when I was all alone in my cell, when my soul began to sink into this despair. I felt that the end was near, but I seized my little crucifix and clutched it tightly in my hand. And now I felt my body separate itself from my soul, and though I wanted to go to my superiors, I no longer had the physical strength. I uttered my last words, "I trust in your mercy," and it seemed to me that I provoked God to an even greater anger, and now I was drowned in despair, and all that was left me was a moan of an unadulterated pain, which, from time to time, tore itself from my soul. The soul is in agony, and it seemed to me that I would remain in this state, because, by my own strength, I could not emerge from it. Every recollection of God opened up an unspeakable ocean of suffering, and yet, despite this, there is something within the soul which is drawn to Him, though it seems to her for this only that she suffer more. The memory of the love with which God formerly surrounded it is still another kind of suffering. His gaze pierces it, and everything within the soul is burned by this gaze. After some time, one of the sisters came into the cell and found me almost dead. She was frightened and went to find the directress of novices who, in the name of holy obedience, ordered me to get up from the ground. My strength returned immediately, and I got up, trembling. The directress recognized immediately the state of my soul and spoke to me about the inscrutable mercy of God, saying, "Do not be distressed about anything, sister. I command this of you in virtue of obedience." Then she said to me, "I see now, sister, that God is calling you to a higher degree of holiness. The Lord wants to draw you very close to Himself, since He has allowed these things to happen to you so soon. Be faithful to God, sister, because this is a sign that He wants you to have a high place in heaven." However, I did not understand anything of these words. When I went into the chapel, I felt as though my soul had been set free from everything, as though I had just come forth from the hand of God. I perceived the inviolability of my soul. I felt that I was a tiny child. Jesus, I trust in you.